Ward 4 at Grantham Hospital, the place where 4 young children died and 9 others mysteriously collapsed. Nurse Beverley Allitt is now Britain's most lethal female killer. But the sheer horror of the deaths has masked one important question. Could the hospital have done more to prevent this tragedy? Grantham in Lincolnshire, a small, quiet town. There's little crime, no riots, no demonstrations, no ghettos. Locals say it's an utterly ordinary town, the most unlikely setting for mass murder. And the safest place in this safe town should be in the hospital, on Ward 4, the children's ward. Young people came here to get well. Their parents trusted it. This is the story of a tragedy in which ordinary families were pitched into a world of horror. But it is also the story of a scandal about a hospital which was so run down and so badly managed that it failed first to notice the killer in its midst and then, having finally noticed, failed to stop her. It was on Ward 4 that Beverley Allitt found her victims. For 58 terrifying days in the spring of 1991, she systematically attacked her patients. Babies and young children were collapsing on average once every 48 hours. They were poisoned, they were crushed, they were asphyxiated.
We took our children in there under the circumstances, thinking that that was the best place for our children to be. They were ill. And we trusted them with our children, and they let us down.
If you can't put your trust in a hospital member of staff who's caring for your child and they do this to them, who in the world do you trust? You trust them with your child's life and they take it away.
A children's party at a hotel in Grantham. But these are no ordinary happy families. All these children had been admitted to Ward 4 with minor ailments. All were to be victims of attempted murder. Henry Chan was found collapsed in his cubicle. He was not breathing. His face was dark blue. Police believe Nurse Allitt suffocated him.
Because Henry wants... Oh no, Henry... And all we've got to do now is give it some legs. Is that right, Zora? Some legs for our dog. There, look.
Twice on one afternoon, Patrick Elston stopped breathing. He suffered brain damage. Police believe Nurse Allitt injected him with potassium. Christopher Peasgood collapsed twice on Ward 4. He was given an emergency christening. Police believe Beverley Allitt slipped poison into his drip. Tragic though these cases are, these children are the lucky ones. They survived. Other children were not to be so fortunate. Liam Taylor was born a healthy 9-pound baby. But at the age of 7 weeks, he developed a heavy cold and had breathing problems. Liam was admitted to Ward 4. His parents then left him in the hospital for a couple of hours before returning later.
That's been quiet.
On going in to see him, he was just lifeless. He didn't seem to have any go in him at all. Whereas when we left him, even though he was congested and poorly, he was still...
He was awake.
Awake and you could still get him to smile.
Liam seemed to recover. Then suddenly, 36 hours later, his heart stopped.
We just said to each other, it must be just meant to be. He's just meant to go, didn't we? And he looked so relaxed at the end, didn't he?
A post-mortem revealed that Liam's heart was terribly damaged, an extremely rare event in such a young child. The Taylors went to see the pathologist for an explanation.
I asked the question then, well, why did he suffer this heart attack? And he says, well, we don't know. We have not got an answer to that.
And it wasn't just a sort of like just a plain cardiac arrest heart attack, was it? It was, he says, that the sort of heart attack he's had is what you expect to find in a 40, 50-year-old chap that smokes and drinks too much. He says, it's the cells around the heart that had gradually died off, apparently, wasn't it? And I mean, you just don't find that in babies.
That was a very, very unusual finding, and it would immediately arouse one's curiosity as to what was going on, and one would want to get as much evidence as possible. But they just seemed to say, well, that's that, and left it. But to say that he died from a heart attack, unexplained, just leaves so many questions up in the air.
These were questions that nobody answered. Much later, the police discovered that Liam had been poisoned. 10 days later, it all happened again. Tim Hardwick was an 11-year-old boy who was recovering from a bout of epilepsy. Like Liam, Tim died from a massive heart attack. His death, too, was a mystery. The pathologist said he died from continuous fits, status epilepticus.
Status epilepticus is really just a descriptive term saying that the child was having continued seizures. It's not really a pathological diagnosis, and one would look for the pathologist to come up with some explanation of the nature of his death. So far as I know, he hadn't had any seizure for about 4 hours before his death, so I think it was both inappropriate to label the death as due to status epilepticus, and it didn't get the case any further as to explaining why he had died.
So 2 children had died in only 10 days. 2 mysteries had gone unsolved, and this was just the beginning. Kaylee Desmond, then aged 15 months, was to be the 3rd victim. She was admitted to Ward 4 with just a mild chest infection, yet she collapsed twice. Her heart stopped. Unable to understand what had gone wrong, the hospital transferred her to the Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham. There she quickly got better, although the Nottingham doctors could find no reason for her near-fatal collapses. The answer lay back in Grantham in an X-ray. Tucked under Kaylee's armpit was a black smear. Air had been injected into the little girl, but nobody spotted it until weeks later. So vital clues were being missed. By now, the senior nurses on Ward 4 were getting edgy. They knew something was drastically wrong, but they were baffled as to the cause.
I'd never known anything like it, and there were more incidents in the space of 6 or 7 weeks than in the previous 10 years that I'd known.
It was just something totally unusual that was happening.
We just thought there was an infection, for one thing, something like that going off. We didn't honestly know what it was, and I think a lot of us just thought it was just bad luck.
It was bewildering, really. You just didn't know why it was happening. It was just so unusual. We were just frightened.
It got to the point where whenever a small child was admitted to the ward, especially if it was perhaps a child with some breathing problem, you could feel the adrenaline rising, and automatically you began to think, oh dear, is this going to be another child who turns out to develop something serious?
Oh dear, oh! Oh!
The 4th victim was 5-month-old Paul Crampton. 3 times in a week, his blood sugar sank so low that he fell into a coma.
I picked him up and he was, I was not able to console him by bouncing him around as one does with a young child. And very shortly after that, he became cold, sweaty, clammy. And then shortly after that, listless and fairly lifeless. And really, that obviously still sweating and clammy, but really listless and lifeless and cold and grey.
The doctors decided to test Paul's blood for insulin. They took a sample, sent it off for tests and marked it urgent. But a combination of Easter holidays and other delays meant it was another 15 days before the test was done.
Well, I think it's a disgrace, but then there was no follow-up. Nothing was done about it. It was sent off urgently, fine, up to that point, but then nobody took the responsibility to follow it through and see what was happening with it.
Can you think of any justification for that failure?
None at all.
Does that seem to you to be negligent?
It certainly seems to me to be negligent, and of course it's possibly caused all sorts of other incidents to happen at a later date which might have been avoided.
While the vital blood test was delayed, more children were attacked. The fifth victim, 5-year-old Brad Gibson, came to Ward 4 the day after the blood sample was sent off. That night, his parents were told that he had stopped breathing.
He was plugged into all sorts of machinery, heart measurement machinery and things like that, and drips. There was an anaesthetist stood at his head, helping him to breathe with a manual pump, and it was horrific, wasn't it? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't ever want to go through that again.
Brad was then transferred to the Queen's Medical Centre in Nottingham. At first, he seemed to recover.
It wasn't till several days later that we found out he had a problem. He couldn't walk properly. He couldn't bear the weight of his body on his legs. He had bowel problems, bladder problems. He had no control over either. There was quite a few different bits and pieces wrong, wasn't there? Mm-hmm. And at one stage they told us that they thought he'd never walk again.
This is for Brad. He wants a giraffe with a long neck.
At Nottingham, the doctors decided that Brad must have been given the wrong drug by accident. But incredibly, this critical information never reached his doctor on Ward 4. An administrative bungle meant that another mystery remained unsolved, even though this time they were only one step away from the truth. Police now believe Brad was injected with potassium by Beverley Allitt.
Long legs at the front, and short legs at the back, look, and ever such a long neck, and that's our giraffe.
Later that week, a 3-month-old baby girl called Becky Phillips was admitted to Ward 4 after having trouble feeding. She was treated and sent home, but in the middle of the night, she went into a coma.
There was just no sound at all. And Peter noticed it and told me she wasn't breathing, or shouted at me that she was not breathing, and he started to resuscitate her.
And what did you do then, Peter?
I tried to resuscitate Becky, giving her the kiss of life, pushing on her heart, and all the time trying to organise Sue, shouting at Sue to phone for the ambulance, and trying to shout my other daughter who was in bed asleep to get her up. I was crying, completely lost control of myself.
But the ambulance didn't come. Peter and Sue Phillips drove Becky to the hospital themselves.
We had to go round to accident and emergency, and the doors were locked. So we had to bash on the hospital doors to get a nurse to come and open them. And Sue was carrying Becky, and she just pulled Becky out of Sue's arms and rushed into the hospital and shouted resus.
Meaning resuscitation?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and within a matter of, well, seconds really, the hospital seemed to be full of doctors and nurses just coming out of the woodwork.
And could they help Becky?
No, she was too far gone when we got her there, but they did try for nearly an hour, desperately hard.
Becky Phillips was the third child to die. The hospital said it was a cot death. In fact, she'd been injected with insulin. Becky's twin sister Katie arrived on Ward 4 simply for observation. There was nothing wrong with her, yet she became the 8th victim.
She had a cardiac arrest that day, although she'd had tests in the morning done by the paediatricians, and they said she was a perfectly healthy baby. Mm-hmm. Then the following day she had another 3.
Were these serious arrests?
Well, the last one she was dead for 42 minutes. They actually told us there was nothing more they could do. And then for some reason she just started breathing again on her own.
Later the police discovered that not only had Katie been poisoned, but 4 of her ribs had been broken. On April the 12th, the laboratory at the University of Wales finally tested the sample of Paul Crampton's blood. This sample had been sent for urgent tests a full 15 days earlier. The results were to be startling.
We found very high insulin levels, a large quantity. It is very surprising. It suggested to me that this baby had actually had insulin injected. I perceived that this would be an urgent situation and telephoned Grantham as soon as we were sure that the results that we had were valid.
And it was clear to you that this child had been injected with too much insulin?
That was the explanation that I came to.
The blood test provided the doctors at Grantham with hard evidence. There may be a killer on the ward. But they did nothing. They didn't call the police, they didn't close the ward.
Looking right way there. Would you like that?
While the hospital failed to act, 3 more children were attacked. One of them was Christopher King, who was suffocated 4 times before he was transferred to Nottingham.
He looked lifeless, his colour was dreadful. He didn't look as though he was still alive anyway, did he?
Well, we both discussed afterwards that we didn't think he was going to survive. All the time we was travelling to Nottingham. And we both thought separately, where we're going to bury him at that point, because we didn't think he was going to live.
Patrick Elston was damaged in 2 attacks, which have left him partially paralysed. He's unable to keep up with his twin, Anthony.
He's weak from his waist upwards. Sometimes he thinks to himself, oh, I can do that, I can walk away, and he'll go to do it, and he'll just fall over. He just hasn't got the strength.
Basically, all the time he's watching Anthony, what he's doing. And then when he tries to do it and he can't, he gets so frustrated, it's unbelievable. He'll scream. He'll scream, and then you've got to come and give him attention.
2-month-old Chris Peasgood stopped breathing twice. His parents thought he was going to die. They called the hospital chaplain, who took this photograph.
I think the ward should have been closed. I don't think they should have allowed children to be took onto a ward that they knew there was something wrong with, whether medical reasons or whether they thought somebody was interfering. I think it was grossly neglectful of them.
By now, 12 children had collapsed and still nothing was done. Doctors went to the hospital managers with their fears. They asked for video cameras to be installed on the ward, but they were refused. 1 set of doors on the ward was locked, but that was all. Then, the 13th victim. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Monday, April the 22nd, Claire Peck came to Ward 4. She was 15 months old, with curly blonde hair, just beginning to say her first few words. Within 4 hours, Claire was dead. Police later discovered that she had been injected with a massive amount of potassium. At the time, doctors knew that the level of potassium in her blood was unusually high, and yet still they claimed that she had simply died of asthma. By now, Ward 4 had suffered a total of 26 unexplained collapses. 4 children were dead, 9 survived with varying degrees of damage, yet still the police were not told for another 7 days. Finally, detectives were called in. Within 20 days, they arrested Beverley Allitt, a 22-year-old nurse working on Ward 4. Dr. David Enoch, a specialist in rare personality disorders, has studied her background.
Up to the age of 13, in particular, she seemed to have been a happy little girl who had friends and who played with the others, and there was no specific trace but that showed that there was any pathology or psychopathology.
But can you see her drifting off course at some point? The early signs of something
well,
going wrong?
Not up to the age of 13, but afterwards, the relationship with her friends then did give some indications that she might have difficulties, in the fact that she became rather cruel towards some of them. And then it appears to me that she began to lie. Then she began to prefabricate stories about what she had done and what she hadn't done and exaggerate them. And those would be signs.
One of those who knew Bev Allitt best was Steve Biggs. He was once engaged to be married to her.
After she started working at the hospital, she started getting a little bit rough with me.
What sort of things do you mean?
Well, we used to have an argument and she turned around and kicked me in the balls, and I was coming back from Grantham in an old banged out Ford Escort. She just passed a test first time and she started on about that, saying you're a useless driver and Well, I just told her to shut up and she'd turn around me and bang me in the eye, 60 mile an hour.
Steve had had enough. He decided to break off the engagement.
She started screaming and shouting. I tried to make for the door, quick, to get out of the place. And she grabbed hold of my hair and brought me to my knees. And started shouting and whatever.
Was she hitting you?
Well, she wasn't hitting me. She had got hold of my hair like that and pulled me down to my knees. And her sister come running downstairs, told her to let go and to leave me alone. And says, ain't you done enough to him already?
World in Action has obtained Bev Allitt's medical record. In her last year as a student nurse, she went to doctors more than 50 times with complaints about almost every part of her body, but almost all of her complaints were phony. She said she was pregnant, that she had a stomach ulcer, a brain tumour. Over and over again, doctors treated her and then discovered she was conning them. To psychiatrists, this kind of addiction to hospitals is a classic symptom of a rare personality disorder called Munchausen syndrome, a desperate craving for attention which in extreme cases can lead to murder. Numerous doctors and nurses at Grantham knew of these bizarre symptoms, yet Bev Allitt was hired to work on Ward 4. Within a week, she attacked the first child.
She's not psychotic. She's not suffering from a specific mental illness or a mental disorder. And that is important. So when the layman might say, she's mad, we would say, strictly, from the definition point of view, she's not mad. There is no psychosis. She has insight. Then it's a question of whether she's a personality disorder or whether she's evil. And I believe in evil. And I have experienced people that are evil. And I think that today we see evil really wreaking great damage in the world. But I believe that she and people like her are damaged personalities. They are personality disorders. And as such, therefore, we should be prepared to treat them and to manage them and to diagnose them.
Nurse Allitt has been convicted of murder, but the questions about the case and about the hospital are only just beginning.
The ward was very poorly managed, was very poorly controlled, and the responsibility of that goes back to the management of the hospital. There were very poor controls in to ensure that the ward was run properly, that it was properly staffed, and that if anything did go wrong, as indeed things do go wrong in hospitals from time to time, that there were reporting arrangements and there were investigative procedures there to be used to prevent any untoward incidents from occurring.
There was a low standard, and perhaps an undesirably low standard of work. Perhaps morale was low, there was inadequate communication, there was not sufficient sort of drive and leadership to make sure that things were covered and were done as well as possible.
Do you think some of these deaths and near deaths were avoidable?
One would like to think so. I think if one had got onto this problem earlier, then the later ones would not have occurred.
Do you feel that the two of you have put it all behind you now?
Not at all, no. I know I haven't, and I don't think we ever will. I don't think it's something you'll ever forget.
You see people out and they probably look at you and say, well, yeah, he looks okay, she looks okay, there doesn't look much worry in them, but they don't have to come home at night and walk into a house where you know something's missing that used to be there.
I don't think it will ever, ever be over for us. We've got the living proof of it. We look at Christopher and we remember what she did.
Well, I think it's something we're never going to be able to put behind us. We have got a life sentence, whatever happens to Allitt. The same as the other parents, we've all got a life sentence.